matter. While in the complete amplitude ideal matter, here we're decomposing them in such a way that we only compute them using Feynman diagrams that are colored order. Now, having all that, I can present to you or review the connected formulation. So the connected formulation for an amplitude of n gluons in the K sector is simply given by the integration over the model space of all the mass from a Riemann sphere with n punctures, dressed with a momentum eigenstate, times this factor here. I hope you recognize this factor as the factor that was sitting there in the MHD amplitude. So this formula basically takes the MHD amplitude and boosts it to all the K sectors. What do I mean by the K sector? Well, if you rescale the custom parameters by a factor t, the amplitude in the K sector is scaled by t to the 4th k. For example, k is equal to 2 for the maximum intelligible evaluating amplitude. In other words, any amplitude can be decomposed in all the possible K sectors. So let me also review the connected formulation, but in a slightly different point of view. This is somehow close to my heart, which is the Grassmannian formulation. So here what we start with an integration over the Grassmannian of two planes in n dimension. So here I'm thinking about these coordinates, about these column vectors as being pointing C2. They are not pointing a Riemann sphere anymore, they are pointing C2. But I don't want to think about them as columns, I want to think about them as rows. So I have two n vectors in n dimensions, and they define a plane. So these metrics define for me a plane. Of course, I'm thinking about modulo GL2 because changing the basis of the plane should be relevant. And I want to boost this into a TK space using a very standard construction in algebraic geometry called the Veronesi map. This is a map of degree D, once again, D is equal to K minus 1, and this is what it does to any of these columns. It maps a column in C2 to a column in CK. So we can do that to the whole metric, and we define a natural map from the Grassmannian of two planes into the Grassmannian of K plane, where each of the entries of this metric are given by this one. Now, in terms of the Grassmannian formula, the connected prescription or the connected formulation is nothing but the integration over two planes. But these two planes are mapped through the Veronesi map into GKN, and these GKN planes, or points in GKN, are K planes that are restricted to contain a particular two plane that contains the seven data, and be in the complement of the lambda tilde plane. So the complement of the lambda tilde plane will be an n minus 2 plane, and somehow be orthogonal to this super partner 4 plane. So that's the full content of the general amplitude in the K sector. Now, a simple counting shows that the number of delta functions completely localized is integral. So this is not really an integral. You just have to compute the delta functions and sum over all solutions. But how many solutions are there for a given choice of n and k? Well, if you don't know the answer, what you do as a physicist is to start gathering data. Well, here is experimental data. For n and k, here are the numbers. So while I describe this slide, I would like to encourage you to add up the numbers in each row and see if you can find a pattern. Okay? Now, once you have experimental data, the next thing to do as a physicist is to find the best fit for the data. It turns out that the best fit for this data turn out to be the Eulerian numbers. The only thing that I'm going to use about the Eulerian numbers is precisely the property that I mentioned. There is something special that happens to them when you add up the numbers in a particular row. I hope you all figure it out. Now we move on to gravity. So we have described the connected prescription in general, and we would like to find something similar to that in gravity. What would be the natural first step to take? Well, find somewhere a connection between gravity and general. But that has a name. It's called the KLC relation that you have heard about. So originally formulating in string theory, the KLC relation can be translated into field theory. And KLC is, in simple terms, it has a contour information argument that involves an integration of a real z bar into two copies of holomorphic integrals over this. And in field theory form, this looks very schematically like this, where you have two copies of Young's amplitude, somehow convoluted with a core that depends on only Mandelstam variables. This is something that Tabasco describes in very much detail. If these were full amplitudes, you would have two copies of momentum conservation, delta function, and this formula would not make any sense. That's why I've been careful to define an amplitude that strips off the momentum conservation in each case, and the KLC relation only relates amplitudes without momentum conservation. So curly A and curly M represent amplitudes that contain momentum conservation, and in the KLC relation, only the ones without momentum conservation enter. The natural question is then, can we use the connected formulation for each of the Young's amplitudes in order to get a formula for gravity? Here are some problems. I just mentioned one of them. One of the problems is that if we just go straightforwardly and use these formulas, we get two copies of momentum conservation, delta functions instead of one. The next one is a puzzle with the R symmetry. Somehow Young only has 84 as an R symmetry. You have two copies of them. So you get 84 plus 34, which is a subgroup of the SUH R symmetry that supergravity is supposed to have. And the general mechanism responsible for the enhancement seems to be a complete mystery. A curious fact is that this is trivial. The enhancement is trivial for the MHD sector, but not so for any of the other sectors. Now, each Young's amplitude is written as a sum over several solutions. The total number of them are the Eulerian numbers. So now on, I'll be assuming that that's the correct answer. So, in other words, that our experiment that we did are actually true, that valid for any n and k. This means that the gravity amplitude is the product of two sums of residues plus the sum over permutation. In other words, we will have many cross terms. And unless some sort of miracle happens, the data we can hope for is a formula that uses two copies of the Grassmannian formula that meets in complicated ways. For example, for 8 particles in the k equals 4 sector, one would have 66 times 66 residues, producing more than 4,000 terms for each permutation that you have. So that's clearly not going to be an improvement. Now, the solution to this problem, in order to describe it, I have to give a little bit of a preliminary, but you have heard about this already. This is the development of KK, known as the KK-BCJ basis, which implies that any Young amplitude, any partial amplitude with any color ordering, with any particular ordering, can be written as a linear combination of a basis of amplitudes where I take three labels, 1, n minus 1, and n in this case. And that means that for any k or short vector, the number of the descending amplitude is n minus 3 factorial, instead of the n minus 1 factorial that we have thought, coming from simplicity, we get n minus 3 factorial term. We will see the significance of this number if you haven't already figured it out. So let's construct a vector that lives in C n minus 3 factorial. Its components are amplitudes, ordered in some way. You can choose the lexicographic way of ordering permutations. So this is a huge vector, and in each component you're putting one amplitude, labeled by the corresponding permutation. That will allow us to define what I would like to call the KLT by linear form. In other words, this means that gravity amplitude has nothing but the inner product of two such vectors in gauge theory using a bilinear form. This bilinear form is an n minus 3 factorial times n minus 3 factorial non-degenerate symmetric metric. And here is the miracle that we were hoping for. At the moment, it's a conjecture, we call it the orthogonality conjecture. So recall that any amplitude can be written as the sum over this many solutions. I'm aggregating the Eulerian numbers by this, like in this form. So we have this many solutions, and I label each solution by the label I. Okay? Now, let Vi be the corresponding n minus 3 factorial vector constructed from this guy. So we can construct for each solution an n minus 3 factorial vector. And here is the first form of the conjecture. The first form of the conjecture tells us that in the same place vector, any two solutions corresponding to two vectors are orthogonal with respect to the KLT by linear form. And the second form of the conjecture is that any two solutions in different case vectors are orthogonal. Well, evidence for the conjecture, it has been tested in all the cases where we have experimental data. Now, here is the observation I hope you made, which is that the total number of vectors for fixed n is obtained by adding the number of solutions for all case vectors. And the nice property of the Eulerian numbers is that they add up to precisely n minus 3 factorial. This means that the set of all residues of the collected formula for fixed number of particles form a complete basis of C n minus 3 factorial, which is orthogonal with respect to the bilinear form. Somehow, Yang-Mills knows that it wants to play nicely with something called KLT in a way that is still mysterious to us. What are the consequences of this orthogonality conjecture? Well, it's very trivial. The consequence is that all these mixed terms that I was telling you about will completely drop out. Only the diagonal terms when you do this product of two vectors will survive, or the product of the two amplitudes. I'll remind you what the KLT formula looks like, and here you're supposed to substitute the sum over all the solutions, and here the sum over all the solutions, but the orthogonality conjecture tells you that they all cancel out unless they have the same index. And therefore, this is the formula that you get. I'm explicitly taking out the supersymmetric part, just in order to see this piece here. You see that since they have the same index, they correspond to the same solution. Before you had an I and J, if the orthogonality conjecture wasn't true, there would be a sum over I and J, but since the orthogonality conjecture is being assumed to be true, there is only a sum over I. And that means that we can nicely define an a-dimensional Grassmann vector and obtain a formula that is manifestly SUA invariant. So we have seen that a natural consequence of the orthogonality conjecture is the enhancement of SU4 cross SU4 into SUA. But how about the integrand? The integrand is still a sum over permutation. It looks a little bit complicated. But remember, in the twisted string formula, or in the connected formula, the integrand was this simple looking formula. That is very reminiscent of the NHC amplitude in Yang-Mills. These sets are polynomials in Mandelstam variables, which I've written here. Now, if these two things were related in any way, this object would actually look like an NHC amplitude, just like the connected prescription was doing in Yang-Mills. Well, on the support of delta function, they are connected. They are related to each other. Therefore, the Mandelstam variables look like something like this, where xab is now defined to be an object that contains the square bracket and the extra factor. This means that the integrand is actually an NHC-like object, just like the Witten RST formula. But now, you may ask a trivial question at this point, which is, if this is you're supposed to use any MHD formula, which MHD formula would you like to use? Do we use the analog of the Park-Taylor formula, and that's Hodge's formula? And here I'm going to describe it in more detail. The matrix phi is a matrix whose off-diagonal components are given by this simple combination of the square brackets and angular brackets, and the diagonal terms look slightly more complicated, but those of you familiar with stop factors in gravity would recognize these as stop factors. So the formula knows about stop limits already. This matrix has rank n minus 3, and this means that any minor obtained by removing 3 rows, say ABC, and any 3 columns BEF is non-zero, and I'll denote it by this. And it turns out that the right formula, or the right definition of this pseudo determinant is nothing but this object over here. It's easy to show that this is completely permutation invariant in all the labels. In other words, you can choose any rows and any columns to remove. They can even be the same label. Using that, we get our third formulation for supergravity, our third connected formulation for supergravity. It again, in the Grassmannian formula, is an integral over G2n of this integrand with the same constraints that we had before, manifestly SUA invariant, and the matrix that we have to put in here is an off-shell generalization of the MHD amplitude, where the matrix is now defined in this form. You see that it's similar to Hodge's formula, but this is what comes about after using the reduction of the KLT integrand. This J is something that compensates for the weight, because in this case, the superstructural space is not Calabi-Yau, so there is something else that has to compensate for the weight, and this J happens to be also a pseudo determinant of a matrix of this size, that has rank 2n plus k minus 4. And it's defined in terms of the Veronese matrix. So what have we achieved at this point? Well, we have a compact formula for the whole three-level matrix of any complete supergravity. It's very reminiscent of the Witten RST formula, in that it takes an off-shell MHD amplitude and boosts it to any case vector. It's manifestly SUA invariant, and using the properties of pseudo determinant, it's manifestly permutation invariant. Parity invariant invariant and soft limit having also checked frequently. What else do we want from this formula? Well, we would like to ask, can this be written nicely in Swift space? At this point, I don't know the answer to this question, but instead of trying to send this formula into Swift space, something that we could do is to find a new formulation. We have a second formulation that will play nicely with Swift space. So the main observation is that DCSW recursive relations for any contained supergravity in Swift space tell us that conformal invariants have to be broken in a very controlled way. People usually say that any contained supergravity being non-conformal will not look nice in Swift space, because Swift space is really natural for conformal theory. But in fact, precisely that fact tells you that if you know how conformal invariant is broken, you can use it to your advantage. And that's what happens here. In the K-2 in the K sector, or in the n to the K-2 LSD sector, conformal invariants have to be broken precisely by a polynomial of degree K-1 in this bracket and n-K-1 in this bracket. But recall that our matrix that we had before was a matrix that produces a polynomial of degree n-3 in the Mandelstam variable. So it doesn't know anything about the splitting. So we have to find something else. So here is the proposal. Once again, we find a super Swift space. This time it's not super Calabi-Yau. We need 8 supersymmetries. So it's a CP3 plus 8. Exactly the same as before, but now chi has 8 components. We find a holomorphic map of degree D from CP1 to CP3 plus 8. Exactly in the same way as we did before. Momentum and stay wave function. I hope you can spot the difference between Young-Mills and gravity. There is only one difference in the formula. Okay, and the difference is a 3 here. Okay, in Young-Mills it was first power, and in gravity we need a cube. And here is the formulation. Okay? Well, this doesn't mean anything unless I tell you what this matrix are, and that's what we're going to do next. So, this is a new formula. These matrices are very reminiscent of the Young-Mills amplitude, of the Hodges formula, but in this case, the off-diagonal terms, these are again n by n matrices. The off-diagonal terms contain more reference objects in both cases. You might wonder, what do they do? And the reason they have more reference names is that now phi tilde doesn't have rank n-3 as before. It has a rank that depends on the K sector, that can be easily checked. It has rank n-K-1, while phi has rank K-1. Remember, the rank is going to be the degree of the polynomials we're going to produce. So this is exactly right to do, or to produce a conformal invariant rating that we were expecting from gravity. So here is the definition of a pseudo-determinant. It's a determinant of a reduced matrix where you remove as many rows and columns as you need to first get something that has non-zero determinants. And in the denominator, you put the random number of the rows and columns that you remove. Well, in the case of phi, the same definition holds. But here it's slightly different because in the denominator you have to put the random number of the rows and columns that remain. And as I mentioned, these matrices do exactly what we needed to break conformal invariance in the way that was expected. Now, what do we know about this formulation? Well, everything invariance is quite pleasant to see, because in this case, phi tilde and phi get exchanged. It has the correct soft limit. By now we know we have a complete proof that it satisfies the DCSW recursive relation, and we also have a Grassmannian formulation. Now there are some pressing questions at this point. Is there a connection to the leading singularities of any contained supergravity? What are leading singularities? Well, these are concepts that come from generalized inequalities that were introduced in the 60s during analytic asymmetric program, and that we have learned that control the full perturbation theory of any control super Young-Mills, and hopefully in this case, this could open a window into the structure of the loop expansion. How much time do I have? 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, very good. So now I can describe the whole loop expansion of any contained supergravity in 2 or 3 minutes. No, instead, I'll give you an outline of the proof using DCSW. So there are 4 steps. The first step is to check these are recursive relations, so we know that supergravity satisfies the recursive relation. So if you check the first step is to check the split amplitudes, which are 3 particle amplitudes in the K+1 and K+2 sectors. Check that the object has a nice large behavior, so that you can use a residual theorem to compute, to produce the recursive relation. The presence of all physical poles that has to be dictated by scalar unitarity and the absence of non-physical poles. So in view of the time, let me skip the first step. That's an exercise for you to check the speed that it reproduces the correct speed amplitude, and let's have a look at the large behavior. And remind you that the DCSW deformation is something that takes 2 particles and deforms them in this form. And the crucial observation is that the large B dependence can be removed from the external data by a simple change of variable. Here I'm using inhomogeneous coordinates for the sigmas, for the world sheet coordinates, but if you allow me to call it the world sheet, or the CP1 where these points live. So